Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew, and I'd like to welcome to the show founder of MetaphysicalSource.com, author, clinical hypnotherapist, and UFO researcher, Jonny Enoch. How are you tonight, Jonny?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me on, Chris.
Oh, well, you're welcome. And I'm very excited to get into tonight's show. And I thought we'd start with a little bit of ancient history, with new discoveries of structures and ancient texts. It seems like we're rewriting history, but there's so much that's still hidden from us. How advanced do you think we were, like pre-flood? Ancient civilizations.
I think we were very advanced, but maybe in a different way than we think now. I tend to look back at our ancient histories and see that they had somewhat of a consciousness-based technology. I believe they understood how to manipulate stone and used sound to levitate objects, as well as perhaps store information in crystals. And they had a very advanced idea about electricity in the universe that the ancients called Fohat. And I've linked this to what we call the serpentine energy. So I believe that, we're just catching up to, very ancient civilizations that have been here. And really quickly, Chris, maybe you're familiar with the Atlantis story, right?
Yes.
Okay, if we go back to the Atlantis story from Plato, we know that he learned the story from his uncle Critias, that learned it from his great-great-grandfather Solon, who traveled to Egypt to meet with Sanchis of Sais, the high priest of Egypt. And he said to him, silly Solon, you Greeks are like children to us. You think that you're so advanced because you have this one flood story that took place. And we know there's a flood story in the Hindu, there's a flood story in the Chinese, but he goes on to say that there's been millions or countless, of civilizations that have been here. And when we look at this, it's just basically like layer after layer of civilizations, and we're playing catch up.
Throughout history, it seems like we've had contact with either extraterrestrial or interdimensional beings. And what do you think stopped that? It seems like at some point we stopped having contact with these beings.
Yeah, well, I believe they've been here the entire time. It's very interesting when you go back to what Sergeant Major Bob Dean was saying many years ago. And I think he's one of the greatest heroes in disclosure and ufology. He's one of my heroes. I absolutely love him. He says that back in 1963, when he was stationed at SHAPE, which is the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, this was with NATO, that he was absolutely shocked, and his entire life was changed before him, because when he was there, he saw a top secret cosmic clearance document that would change everything in his life. And when he opened that report, he read in there that it actually said that not only did military intelligence know that we have been visited for thousands of years by these extraterrestrials, but they were peaceful. It went on to say that if they wanted to take us over a long time ago, they could have, but they don't. And the report read that they were not only interplanetary, intergalactic, interstellar, but also multidimensional. So I believe this is very true. And actually, if we go back into many of our ancient, any of our ancient texts, I don't care where you look, Assyrians, Akkadians, Phoenician, Canaanites, Etruscans, Egyptians, and many of these ancient civilizations, we have these winged gods that are giving us all sorts of gifts of civilization. They're giving us, ideas about agriculture. And actually, the entire story that we get from the Vedantic writings out of ancient India are absolutely fantastic. They're filled with stories about vimanas and flying machines and these gods that are moving around. So I think they've been here for a very long time.
And can you talk about some of the uses for some of our most ancient structures, like obelisks and the pyramids? What were they used for? What were some of the meanings?
Yes. Well, there's different meanings. It depends who you ask. So some people will say that the obelisks were actually phallic symbols, and they may have very well been like that as well, because we know to the ancients there was a great appreciation for reproductivity, and sexual energies and whatnot. And just like King Edward III was famous for saying on the story with the Countess of Salisbury, that the Order of the Garter uses the motto, "Honi soit qui mal y pense," shame on him who think evil of it. So there's nothing really vulgar or evil out of these symbols if you see it like that, with the phallus of the yoni. But the idea with the obelisk, I tend to think that this is, as Stephen Mailer has said, that these are like acupuncture needles on the planet along our energy ley lines. They direct energy. And this has long since been known in esoteric principles. That's why when you go to places like, you go to London over by Westminster, you'll see that we have the Ben, the tower of the towers that you see around there, you'll see that are shaped like an obelisk with Big Ben. And you'll see over in the areas of Paris, when you go up and look at the Eiffel Tower, that we see that it's shaped like an obelisk. And actually, again, going back into Big Ben, we also have a connection to the Ben stone. And going over to Heliopolis. So again, these have been long since known that they were a type of technology. And really quickly, to go back into your bringing up the pyramids are found all over the planet, as you know, Chris. And we find, of course, the Great Pyramid in Egypt is one of the greatest of all mysteries of all time. We look at it, and there's still some people that look at it today and say, oh my God, it's got to be a tomb for Khephren or Khufu. And again, we're not even sure if he even existed. And this idea that it was a tomb is based off of a Victorian age forgery, and it's total nonsense. One of the things that we look at the Great Pyramid, you just have to go there in person and witness its magnificence as you stand before it. It's one of the most incredible things. It's a timeless sermon in the stone, this magnificent edifice, mathematically perfect, built with millions of blocks. And according to the great Chris Dunn, and his Giza power plant hypotheses, he said that he believes it's built like a Faraday cage. So it's, the different layers that you'll find with, like, let's say a granite, a sandstone, a limestone, that it's so perfectly cut when you move inside of it within its chambers, from the subterranean chamber to the queen's chamber, the king's chamber. It's magnificent. And we know that it has many different roles. For example, Chris, I believe it has like almost a hyperdimensional quality to it as it taps into these electromagnetic energies on our planet. We know that when Napoleon stepped inside of the Great Pyramid, he had an out-of-body experience, and he saw his Waterloo. He came out white as a ghost. And many people that I've even been in with inside the Great Pyramid, up in the King's Chamber, they've had out-of-body experiences. They've had these otherworldly feelings in it. It's a magnificent energy. One of the other interesting things are that when you look underneath the Great Pyramid, the entire Giza Plateau has literally been artificially layered there. It's got these Osirian shafts that go underneath it that are magnificent, totally pre-dynastic, totally cut by much earlier and fantastic civilizations, which were later, others came along and wanted to become Egyptians and cycles and started taking these places on as their own. Well, there's these kind of portals that are cut on top of that in layers that could have been used this as an electromagnetic grid or energy conducting system. So really quickly, the other pyramids in the planet are also really incredible because we know that there's pyramids on both sides of the Atlantic. Even when you look over at Chichen Itza there in the Yucatan, for Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan. We know that there is, one of the largest pyramids in the world is actually in China, where they found Caucasoid mummies. And just even 10 miles north of Bimini in the Bahamas, there's been a largely suppressed crystal pyramid under the water. So this pyramid's all over the world.
That's fascinating. And going back to even, the earliest of man, where did we come from? Did we originally come from here on Earth, or are we from elsewhere? Were we brought here? I mean, what's going on with us?
Well, that depends on who you ask.
Right.
That's a very complex question because we have different ideas of what our anthropology teaches us these days. Depending on what anthropologist that you talk to, there's some very good ones out there that understand how complex we are. That we're a hybrid species. Nobody today that's alive is outside of this. We're all hybrid species. We've been mixing and matching so long on this planet. There's no doubt that we had a genetic upgrade at one point, and I can trace back where that comes from. Where that genetic upgrade took place. But most certainly, if you look, we've been mixing with Neanderthal. They found like a hobbit-like species that you look over in Java. But most certainly, it's very interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Denisovans. Did you hear about the discovery in 2008 up in a Siberian cave of the Denisovans?
Yes.
So we have absolutely. It's amazing that here we have this tall Asiatic-like people that were good tool makers. And because of their ability to survive and everything, it's actually their DNA has been found in the peoples that are up even in the Tibet areas. So that's how they can live up in high altitudes, because they have that DNA, or even in certain Native American people, it's believed that they crossed the Bering Strait or the Bering Land Bridge. So we've all been mixing and matching with Cro-Magnon and, all these different groups. But it's very interesting because we get stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where we see that the gods saw the wild man and said, okay, let's give him an upgrade, or let's mingle him with a divine prostitute under Ishtar. This is the story of the Bible. One thing is, when you go back into the book of Genesis in the Bible, it tells us in there that the gods are saying, the Elohim are saying, let's make man in our image. So they're not making man. Man already existed. And the other thing in the Bible we see is that what we refer to as Adam, as in the story of Adam and Eve, we get a much different version of that when you talk to rabbis. They'll tell you that Adam comes from ADM, which was a race of people. And they also have a story in the Jewish Midrash that Adam, as this creature, was a giant that was an androgyne, that was like a hermaphrodite, Hermes and Aphrodite. So it was this being that looked in both directions. And instead of the rib story that we get in our conventional stories, this being was split in half. And it was just like the god Janus, that January is named after, that looks in both directions. So this idea that we've had an upgrade, it's found all through the ancient world. It's amazing.
And now these original creators are spoken of in the Bible as the Elohim. Are these interdimensional beings, or are they actual physical extraterrestrials?
I have different theories about different beings that have been on this planet, and I think some of the most interesting stories that we can look at are the stories of giants, of the stories of these beings with elongated skulls.
Right.
And I think there's something to that, and that's why Brian Forrester's work has excited me so much. All the work that he's doing over in Peru, he's been working for years with the Peruvian government to get permission to look at these elongated skulls that they found over in Paracas. And now that the DNA testing has proven some very interesting things about who they are, outside of our conventional ideas that would put them in a regular classification of a regular human or someone that has cranial deformation. They're in a totally different genetic class of UTE1, different than the Inca, different than Native American groups, which would belong to different haplotypes like A, B, C, D, and X, which totally challenges conventional academia. They have larger and heavier skulls and different places where the spine would sit, and they've been classified as a different type of being known as Homo sapiens sapiens paracus. Now, what's also interesting about this, and this is a very, very interesting subject. We could go so deep into this, like Pandora's box. I don't know how much time we have. What's interesting about this is that they're linked over to the Scandinavian areas, Crimea, Black Sea. We start going into these Himalayan areas. And this is really, really fascinating because we see certain migrations from northern India and all those places that are so interesting to the mysteries. But what caught my attention with this, so you go back to the beginning of Egyptian mythology, we have Ptah and the demiurges. But if we go further, one of the greatest, protagonists or progenitors that we see in Egyptian mythology is Osiris. And when you look at Osiris, usually I have Egyptian statues on my desk, but I have a pen that will sort of show you the head of Osiris. Osiris is usually depicted as a god that is a giant with an elongated skull. And these rulers that were, connected to a divine class of beings on this earth that were here with these elongated skulls, we got to ask ourselves, where did he come from? Well, Plutarch told us that the gods of ancient Egypt were the antediluvian or pre-flood or pre-cataclysmic kings who were deified, made into gods after death. And so when we look at who these beings were that were helping civilization, they were helping seeding us after the cataclysms, such as we learn about in Babylonian or Chaldean lore. We learn about Dagon, Nimrod, or Oannes coming to their people and reseeding them with his fish hat or his mitre, which is why the Pope wears that hat. We start to see some very interesting clues.
Right. So some of these ancient beings, do you think there are factions today that are still in contact with some of these entities?
I believe so, and I believe they're amongst us. And I also believe that these various groups that kind of split out in these ancient times to these waves of civilization, we saw remnants of them, and there's a very good reason for this, and how civilization split out, and how we were seeded by intelligent beings, and where we looked, where they all went. But in order to find out how that happened and the path that they went, we have to kind of look at what happened on our planet. But I don't think they left. In fact, I think that's where a lot of our royal lineages and bloodlines and everything else came from. And I think we're all descended from these various migrations and groups.
And you were saying these ancient bloodlines, some of these bloodlines that are still in control today use a lot of the ancient occult symbolism in certain, construction and just different layouts and sigils and a lot of things that they use, in Hollywood and everywhere. Can you talk about some of the symbolism that we're seeing today that was brought from those ancient times?
Absolutely. It's all around us. It's seeded into our religions, which religion should be treated as a science. It's seeded into our society, our symbolism, into our language. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but these symbols have a very ancient and profoundly important meaning. And as Manly P. Hall would always say, that once we learn to read the language of symbolism, there's going to be a great veil that will fall from our eyes, that we're going to see that, humanity has a divine seed, that, there's been a select few that have understood this, that we've come a long way, and we're on a great journey together. I don't look at, these various symbols and say, oh my God, that's an evil symbol. And when you look at the goddess on the side of the Starbucks cup, you're going to see that it's actually Isis or Pisces. And it's going to resonate with you on another level. It's going to have a more impactful meaning. And, it's like when you look at the back of a Mazda car when you're in traffic. The Mazda car, it's very interesting. You see that little winged disc symbol. Well, that, again, is very interesting because you go back into the story of Zoroastrianism with Zarathustra universe coming down on a flying disc, Ahura Mazda. So all these symbols, are powerful for us, and it's powerful for those in the know.
And can you talk a little bit about the symbolism that we have here in Washington, D.C., in our own capital?
Absolutely. Well, you have the Washington Dome, or you have just like the Domo. You have the fasci connected to fascism. You have obelisks. There is all sorts of Masonic symbolism because the founding fathers and the story, the great story of the United States of America, essentially is a great Masonic republic, and that's where all the symbolism comes from. And those that appreciate the mysteries and follow these ideas closely, have always appreciated certain ideals and esotericism. And it's sort of one of those things that for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, appreciate the beauty and the magnificence of a lot of these ideas. But make no mistake about it, America was no accident. And America actually came from incredible and powerful ideals that go back to ancient Egypt and the ancient world.
Now, what would be some of the purposes of using this symbolism today in our modern world?
Well, again, you have a type of connection to symbolism with your subconscious that is opening up, a powerful feeling within you. There's a certain energy that's held onto it. You mentioned sigils, and sigils do have a sort of a magical quality to them, which is very important. But, as well, the sigils and symbols are another way to communicate with those that know. They tell a story. They have a deeper idea and a deeper meaning to them that is very, very powerful, that's timeless. And it can be carried on for thousands of years. I mean, look at when we go into the great temples of Egypt. When we see the hieroglyphic languages, these pictorial images that we find on the great reliefs, well, you look at them and you know that depending on what way that they face, let's say if you're looking at a serpent, the serpent faces left, you're going to read the hieroglyphics left. If it's facing down, you're going to face, read it down. They went every single direction with the hieroglyphics. But here's the thing about the Egyptian hieroglyphics is that we get a lot of our knowledge about that from, let's say, the Rosetta Stone. And what the Greeks, brought us, going out of the Greco-Roman times of Egypt and those particular cycles with the great Macedonian conqueror, Alexander the Great, and Ptolemy. And we credit a lot to Ptolemy, especially with wonderful temples like Hathor's temple in Dendera. But there's no question that there was one language, one version of the language that everyone else had. One version of the hieroglyphics and the symbols that they let the Greeks have, and then there was a secret meaning that was held by the priestcraft. And this has always been true when we look at what an esoteric concept is and an exoteric concept. Traditionally, for occultists, when they were looking at something that was more of an esoteric concept or a secret concept, what they would do is that they would write it in languages that were from right to left, towards the heart. And if it was exoteric for common knowledge for the profane, it was written from left to right, away from the heart. So again, that there's multiple meanings to symbolism. There's usually versions of symbolism that if are for everyone to look at, and they kind of deceive you and look in the other way. Then there's the meaning that's for those who study the mysteries.
That's fascinating. And I understand not only in Hollywood, but in Disney, there is some very heavy occult symbolism going on there. And I understand you've done some fascinating research into that. Would you talk about that for us?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to say that I have a profound respect for Walt Disney, and I'm a big fan of Disney. I go to all the Disney parks whenever I travel. I'm a fan, so I'm not knocking Disney at all. I thought he was just an incredible genius, and he was a great appreciator for the Rosicrucian mysteries. He's a man that struggled with great hardships, a beautiful heart and soul. So I just want to put that out there first of all, but most certainly a fascinating man who appreciated all these things. But when you look at him, first of all, he had an upbringing in de Malays, which is a young version of Masonry named after Jacques de Molay. And, for Jacques de Molay, he was persecuted very famously on Friday the 13th, 1307. 13 is also the letter M in the alphabet, which is significant in Masonry. So even the address for Disneyland is 1313 South Harbor Boulevard, which is really fascinating. And he had kind of salutes to that within, his Pythagoras cartoon with Donald Duck and so much more. But the whole story behind Disneyland is fascinating. It's an occult story. And it's, we haven't really gone into this today, but one of my favorite subjects to talk about are the serpentine mysteries on our planet, that we have all this serpentine energy, which is connected to a type of geomagnetic electric currents on our planet that all our ancient temples and everything are built upon. Well, when Walt Disney was building Disneyland, he contracted out through some guys associated with the Stanford Research Institute's DARPA type programs, two guys named Buzz and Woody, just like the story about, the Toy Story guys, Buzz and Woody. These are the guys that he contracted out to help build Disneyland and design it. And they actually put Disneyland on an orange grove on the 33rd parallel, just like the Great Pyramid and Glastonbury Tor. And they put the castle on the influx of where that sits. And right behind the castle, they put the carousel to act as a Tesla coil to spin the energy around in the park. So you feel really good when you go to Disneyland using these principles, ancient principles. Really quickly, Walt was also really fascinated with the Rosicrucian mysteries and symbolism. So when you go through there, we have lots of different symbolism, not only is the symbolism really important for, stuff like It's a Small World? Are you familiar with that, Rod?
Yes, I am. I've been on it.
Okay, so if you think about it, when you go through It's a Small World, this was taught to me by a friend named Sean Rachel out in California, that when you go through It's a Small World, you'll notice that the sun follows you the whole way through. The sun is actually the protagonist, and this is like the light of Freemasonry that's guiding the world. Well, you find other kinds of symbolism, even in fantasy lands, zodiacal symbolism, all sorts of Templar ideas on the back of the castle. But when you go over where Frontier and Adventureland is, there's a very famous club that maybe you've heard of. Have you heard of Club 33?
I have, yes.
Okay. Well, when you go to Club 33, this is a very exclusive club. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever, as this has been covered by people like Hank Kreischer and many others, that there's no doubt that the symbolism we find is very reminiscent of a Masonic lodge. And there's no doubt associated with the 33 from 33 in Scottish Rite Freemasonry. And the fascinating thing about that is that it's a very exclusive secret club. You can even find it on Google Maps, but most people have never heard of it. And I believe that it was put there at the beginning of the park for an association with maybe those who had something to do with, investing or putting something into the park at the time, that believed in the dream of Disneyland. But we see other nods to Masonry, such as on the Jungle Cruise ride, it originally said the working tools of H. Abiff, which is Hiram Abiff, the widow's son from Freemasonry. So what's really interesting, Jordan Maxwell pointed out to me when we were in California, that when you're right at Club 33, it overlooks the Pirates of the Caribbean. So why that's significant, it's kind of an inside joke, is that when you look at the Pirates of the Caribbean, many people don't know the Templar connection, is that the Templar Knights became the Knights of Malta, became the Pirates of the Caribbean, then that established the world banks. But here's an association with Templar Masonry, and it's kind of a salute to their old buddies right above Club 33. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think it's really cool. And there's all sorts of other really beautiful pieces of symbolism and whatnot. But I don't look at any of these things as being bad. I think of them as really fascinating.
Now, you had mentioned serpentine energy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Many people don't know how profoundly important and interesting that this is, Chris. This is probably one of the coolest secrets in the world. And once you tap into it, it's amazing what you learn. Is that if you go back into the secret Eastern doctrines, look at the work of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, what you'll see is that what it was believed in the mysteries is that originally in our universe, there was a type of energy called Fohat, which was a type of electricity, and it moved like this, in the shape of a serpent. All the debris in our universe before things were being formed moved in this serpentine path. Okay, so this type of energy was divided up into three ways in the mysteries. It was divided up into a bioelectrical type of energy we call Kundalini in the body, which maybe you're familiar with the caduceus medical symbol that you've seen with the swan wings. That was associated with Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus. So this essentially is the energy of the Kundalini moving up the 33 vertebrae. Again, there's that 33 again where it's associated with, and awakening out these areas through the pineal and through the left and right hemisphere of the brain. And you also see this shown on the headdress of the Egyptian king that we see very clearly there. So we also find this in another type of principle known as geomagnetic energy. So across our planet, we know that this geomagnetic energy is found everywhere, these serpentine energy ley lines and these migration lines. Now, this is really cool and really fascinating because actually, if you look at all who the serpent rulers are in this world and where the serpentine mysteries are connected to, we go back into Egypt. As I mentioned, we have the serpent there. We have the serpent all through Asia with the Naga serpent and the seven heads, like the seven root races. We go into Greece at the Oracle of Delphi. We have the Hydra. We go into Mexico at Yucatan there. We have Quetzalcoatl, Cuculcan. We can even go up into Tikal, Guatemala and all those areas, up even into Peru. In Peru, we have Viracocha, which again, I won't get into the details. It's also associated with the serpentine paths of migrations on this planet. But then we have Amaru. Amaru was the other serpent god in Peru, which is where America gets her name, Amaruca, land of the plumed serpent. So within these types of serpentine energies, we have that level of these geomagnetic lines and properties. And actually, right in the Bible, it says in the book of Genesis that the tribe of Dan, and I tell you, the tribe of Dan is an interesting topic as well. When you look at the story of Ireland with the Tuat the Danann that came there on flying ships, hence the serpentine mysteries, and St. Patrick chasing the serpents out of Ireland. That's an interesting one. But it says in the Bible that the tribe of Dan followed the path of the serpent. And as they followed the path of the serpent, the adder was biting at their feet. And if you look at where else this story takes us, when I've been in Egypt with Brian Forrester, he's gone around with his Tesla meter, looking at various electromagnetic energy and magnetic anomalies on blocks, even the H blocks that he's measured over in Punapunku. But he showed me that all of our temples that we have, the old temples that have been built, are actually off by 23 degrees of the last cataclysm from the directions of north, east, south, west. Showing us that when the earth shifted, but we can see when the last cataclysm hit on earth, as Brian and I have made videos about this there, that you can see where there was like a path of destruction where the solar storms would have followed along these electromagnetic grids and just decimated the temples. Lastly, and I know I'm going off on a rant here.
Oh, you're here. It's fast.
We're good. We're on a roll.
Yeah.
Lastly, with this energy, this serpentine energy that's on our planet, that these great beings and masters understood, they had a type of universal energy that could be tapped into, and this is very clearly depicted when you see that who these ancient giants were I've been talking about. And believe me, that topic of giants is huge. We could get into that forever. But if you look over in the crypts of Dendara's temple, Hatura's temple in Dendara, you'll notice what's been very famously called the light bulb glyph. You'll see that there's giants that are giving this serpentine energy to the regular humans that are below them, which is very, very interesting. This serpentine energy that is this type of energy that moves without frequency in a different pattern is what Tesla discovered. He called it scalar energy. You remember he was giving us wireless free energy after 1902, and J.P. Morgan pulled the plug. The Nazis tapped into this energy too. They called it Vril. And we know that there's people out there like Dr. Stephen Greer that are trying to tell you about 0 point energy, free energy in the universe. And I believe that this is one of the most highly covered up secrets of this type of energy. And it was understood back then by the ancients. And it's very clear once you examine the mysteries.
Now, can this energy also be used for malevolent purposes? And is it currently being used for any purposes of that sort?
I'm certain that it can be used for many different purposes. I mean, look at HARP and just ask yourself about what the implications for that is. There's all sorts of different technologies that Tesla developed that are still sought after. We might ask ourselves, why were Tesla's labs getting burned to the ground? Why was he being threatened? He was so brilliant in what he had tapped into and given us. And so many have tried to give us this energy before and try to talk about it, and it's very suppressed. But the point is that even when you look at how it works with us, you might say that this could regenerate us or give us all sorts of new abilities or give us influence. Which again, if you look at the German secret societies like the Thule Society and the Vril Society, they were very much researching that. Not only how Vril could be used to have influence, but how it could be used to power things like UFOs and to be used for scalar weapons and whatnot. So it's most certainly it's incredible to think about these sort of implications.
Earlier you had mentioned giants. Now these giants you talked about, are they the same giants that would be from the book of Enoch that that spawned from the Watchers? I'm sorry, you were breaking up.
Yeah, okay, so we have the in Watchers 6, books 6 through 7, that talks about this. They came down, and the fallen angels laid with the daughters of men and produced an offspring of giants. These were the men of renown. We also see that in the Bible itself. the mentioning of them, and it actually says, even when we go back into the book of Numbers and everything else, it talks about the idea that these giants were so large at times that we appeared like grasshoppers next to them. And they came out of this union of these fallen angels. And what's very interesting about that is that we find evidence for giants all over the world. We find evidence for them in Egypt. If you're in the Cairo Museum, you see these 15 to 25 foot sarcophagi, and it says enormous coffin next to them. And remember, the progenitor of ancient Egypt was a giant with an elongated skull named Osiris. I found evidence for other reliefs around Egypt that you're not allowed to take pictures of the giants that ruled over them. There's petroglyphs from the Zuni and the Hopi. In Native American culture of giants and extraterrestrials. Our indigenous people here have the legends of giants. So we have these giants mentioned ubiquitously all throughout the world, these ancient rulers that appeared to be here at one point that seem to be pre-cataclysmic or pre-dynastic. So it's very fascinating.
Now, what do you think happened to the giants throughout time? Did they just die off, or were they killed? What do you think?
It would appear that they were wiped out for the most part through these cataclysmic events, and I don't believe, from what I've seen, that they were all bad by any means. But there's something to do with, that we learn from these stories, especially in the story of Goliath in the Bible and other with the Philistines and another text, that some of them were up to no good, so to speak, and. We also might have reason to believe that the gods or the overseers on the earth might not have been too impressed with them at one point, such as in the Plato story. We learn about the great fireball of the comet from the gods that hit the earth. So there was definitely some major changes that went on here and different cycles of civilization. But we also have other stories of giants connected to Egypt. When you look at the Arabian Nights or 1001 Nights, there's a story about the giants that built the pyramid. It's hard to say whether it was them that built it, but there's a very famous story about the Caliph Al-Mamun that sent his faithful and loyal servants to go underneath the pyramid to get the treasure that was put there by the giants. And it's said that that's where one of the entrances came from, but it's greatly disputed whether that's where the entrance into the Great Pyramid actually came from, and it wouldn't have existed during Greco-Roman times. We're told that on the outside of the pyramid, that when all the casing stones were in place, that it was just, there was no blocks on the outside. It was just one big shiny appearance on the outside of the pyramid, and that this was flawless and there was no way of entering it, and that the Caliph's men went in there to get the treasure hidden by the giants.
Wow, that is fascinating. So these beings, do you think that there's a way to still contact some of these beings?
Absolutely, I do. I mean, look at the protocols that Dr. Stephen Greer has been talking about. There have been people in our Indigenous and First Nations communities that I've talked to, even here in Canada, that I've talked to, the likes of your Derek White Sky Clouds, who's a Métis elder in these communities. I've talked to Tom McCallum, who is the keeper of the sacred dances for the Star Lodge, that they talk to the star beings and these beings come out to them. And some of the things that they do is they carry, copper pennies on them and prepare for a whole day of praying. And there's certain preparations that they do on another level to contact them. But we've been contacted for a very long time. And I think that's a very interesting topic that you just brought up, is that people always ask me that question. They say, if ETs are real, why haven't we heard from them yet? Why haven't we gotten a signal,
Your experiences with people who have been contacted. Can you talk about maybe some of the more profound experiences that you've come across?
Well, there's different categories, I'd say, from the people I've talked to that have had ET contact, and they're all very fascinating stories. You get people that come to you with all sorts of different experiences, and they want to know more about it. Sometimes they can't remember all the details about what happened. They have missing time. They don't recall all the details. They can only remember that maybe, some time went missing, or they were looking at something that they couldn't understand. So I've worked with people using clinical hypnotherapy, because that's some of the work I've done. But I've also talked to people who've been experiencers. And for the most part, some of the most profound things that I've heard is what it's like on these ships where they go. I mean, on these ships, they can fit hundreds of thousands of people. They have their own ecosystems, basically, with their own, tropical trees and areas to go in there. It's almost like being on a very advanced cruise ship, and where they can regenerate food or out of vegetarian materials. It seems like on these ships where they go that they have the ability to even get Earth television to see what we're doing and kind of look at us from that level. But from the contactees I've talked to, the beings that they encounter, most of the times the message is so super positive and beautiful. It's about how we need to become the great caretakers of our Earth and not only become citizens of the world, but also the universe, because our destiny is in the stars.
So using your hypnotherapy, does it allow people to remember experiences they wouldn't normally remember?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. I mean, you're constantly suppressing memory or forgetting memories, and to recall those memories and to go back into certain brainwave states is very, very helpful. And I don't believe anything is ever really truly lost. We have the ability to go through there or even correct certain memories or enhance them. And so that's the most amazing thing. For example, people that have been traumatized by a certain event in clinical hypnotherapy, they can go back and they can recall all the painful details of that event they might not have recalled before. But what they can do is they can go give themselves, the younger version of themselves, a hug and tell themselves that everything's going to be all right. And they can sort of come to grips with it. And you can also deal with certain things like, let's say, a psychosomatic pain that you might not remember. But with these experiences, what's really fascinating with the ET contactees is that sometimes while doing the experience with them, going through it, it's almost like the event is happening in simultaneity, which I believe it is. And some of these beings might be more advanced in their development, where the being that they're interacting with at that moment is also interacting with you. It's almost like the being that interacted with them at that moment knew that you were going to be working with them, is giving it to you, and it's like messing with you. It's almost like something's happened in linear space-time that's broken the continuity. So it's really profound and quite beautiful. It almost brings you to tears when they start talking.
Now, do they have to watch out for what type of entities they're contacting?
You see, I know there's people out there that have this idea that we have these malevolent and evil beings. And I think we live in a vast universe full of all sorts of multidimensional intelligences, and some of them have been misunderstood. But I tend to think that for the most part, what we call malevolent or evil might just be misunderstood. Like, for example, when people were talking about these grays, abducting them, different types of grays, and they were saying how terrifying it was. I don't know if the intention of those grays was to terrify them. I think that might just have been a lack of empathy on their part of looking at it from more of a scientific or empirical sort of mindset.
Do you believe in there might be sort of parasitic beings that attach to people?
I most certainly heard that concept thrown around. And I mean, when we talk about beings, that opens up all sorts of different ideas as well. Like, were we talking about extraterrestrial beings? Are we talking about spiritual entities? Are we talking about, human beings? What's very interesting to me is I also interview a lot of people who have had near-death experiences. I've always been fascinated by the afterlife and near-death experiences, and I do believe that we all tend to go and transcend after this life. I don't believe it really exists. It's an illusion. So sometimes I believe that there's beings that might have existed in this life here that might not have always been the best people when they were living. They might not have fully learned all their lessons, and when they finally cross over to the other side, they will move through those lessons, and they will look at what they did when they're finally willing to look at their life review, and they'll say, okay, maybe I'll do it better next time. But sometimes I believe this is what causes a haunted house to take place, and sometimes those beings that can get stuck in there might not be the friendliest entities. But the good news is that when we have a haunted house in our world, that might be, it might seem like that house or castle's haunted for 200 or 300 years, but that might only be a second on the spirit side. So if you mean that by like an attachment or a parasitic type of entity, then yes, I guess that that sort of does exist from time to time. But I don't know. It's a very good question. I think we live in a vast universe, and there's all sorts of different possibilities.
And you said that you can go back and give yourself a hug. Do we live in some type of multi-dimensional or multiverse type of reality?
Oh, yes. Well, you most certainly are living in a multiverse reality, and you are a multidimensional being, Chris. This is very exciting. Actually, I believe we live in a multiverse. And what's really fascinating is that not only is there all sorts of different models for this in our theoretical physics, but one of those is connected to the idea of the Big Bang. So we know when they look at something called the Wilkinson's microwave anisotropy probe, or the WMAP scan for short, that they looked at the radioactive background scan of our universe, and what they actually found is that not only is our universe in the shape of a dodecahedron, which Plato actually told us in the Timaeus, which is a real trip how he knew that really about the cosmos, but there's these circuitous patterns in the background of our universe that looks like there's been multiple Big Bangs. And so what that tells us is that these sort of cookie cutter universes that kind of rolled out. So that we're living this we're just like a little bubble in a vast ocean full of universes, and that there's greater realities and concepts even behind that. And as multidimensional beings with our consciousness being a non-local awareness, there's a non-locality factor to it that, we're here to grow and evolve. And it's so beautiful.
Now, are there ways of experiencing those other dimensions while we're still here in our own?
Oh, most certainly. Look at the various Eastern modalities, the secrets that were held in Buddhism of esoteric meditation techniques. And believe me, there's some fascinating meditation techniques that you can really tap into that will open up greater states of consciousness in the mind that were greatly hidden. And these sort of concepts that we get, even your astral projection techniques, people have looked at various plant teachers and entheogens and things like dimethyltryptamine or float tanks and different kinds of concepts like that. Maybe I don't know, watching your show.
Now, speaking of the afterlife, are we here one time? Are we reincarnated? Is this like a training ground for a better place? What do you think's going on afterwards?
Okay, that's a very good question. And I can absolutely say that I believe that we come here for as many times as we need to, and we don't have to come here, but you come here so you can grow and evolve. And there's no doubt about that. We all come from places of unimaginable power and light. And as the great Terence McKenna said, one day you'll return to those places. And there's a lot of clues that you get in your life that you've done this before, or certain ideas when you come here. One of those things might be, let's say you have certain proclivities, certain things that you really want to do. We see that the idea of child prodigies. And there's going to be people out there that are going to say, well, child prodigies could be the result of genetic memory. Yeah, well, maybe for some things. We've seen the great work over at the University of Virginia with the work such as with Dr. Jim Tucker, who's looked at children that have had past life memories that have been so incredibly accurate and amazing that they've been able to verify their details. You get people that might be very good piano players and painters, but maybe you come here to complete something that's totally unrelated to something you've done before. You get a guy like Stradivarius, that who knows what he had done in his previous lives leading up to that invention. We got to really ask ourselves from a great philosophical point of view, is that why would a species come here with this cruel paradox of an awareness of our own finitude, of our own death, for no reason? Why would we go through all this beautiful the beautiful realities of life just to have it all wasted away? So what I found in my hypnotherapy work working with people using Dr. Michael Newton's life between life protocols is that people have a memory of what it's like to pick their bodies before they get here, to go and consult with a council of wise ones or a council of elders about a life plan, to kind of know who we're going to meet in life and kind of have something set up. And all through our life, we are absolutely surrounded with beings that are helping us and sending us messages to keep us on track of where we're going. Moreover, what's interesting is that we learned from our NDEers that these places that we call home, that there is a real heaven, in the place above our earth, according to the likes of someone I talked to, like Garnet Schulhauser, if you've ever heard of him. In his incredible story, he relayed to me that the heavenly city above our earth is called Aglaia. And over there, you have halls of records, and there's constant concerts over there, as he would encounter when he went to the other side. He saw the Beatles, and he saw John Lennon and Ringo Starr, and they were singing Yesterday. And he was amazed at you. On the other side, we go through classes over there. We can explore other universes or other areas of the universe and other places. It's amazing. But it seems like there's a heavenly city above our earth that has all sorts of beautiful architectonics and structures from Earth, and people at different time periods that are in different costumes and different ideas, but they're very human-based on our Earth. And it's interesting, he said that there are other heavenly cities in above other planets, but the idea is that all the heavenly cities are actually connected. So we go through this place where we're coming here as souls, continually always evolving and always growing. There is no real sense of a punishment other than the disappointment we have within ourselves, which sometimes can take a bit to heal. But the exciting part about this is that we do go on. There is an afterlife. It's extremely positive, this entire process, and it's beautiful.
Wow, very well said. And our minds, they can do so much more than, than we think they can. And they actually have the ability to heal ourselves. Can you talk a little bit about how we can use our mind to help heal our bodies?
Oh, Chris, you still with me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, the connection faded out. Okay, so the question I heard was, do we have the ability to, hold on, let me just turn off this phone.
Yeah.
This phone was just ringing. Your question was, do we have the ability to heal ourselves with our mind?
Correct.
Okay, so absolutely, we do have the ability to heal ourselves with our mind. We have to look at the fact that the mind makes a better servant than it does a master. So it's just like Helena Petrovna Blavatsky would say that the mind is the great slayer of the real. And you'd be surprised at how much of what we hold on to, in the sense of even our diseases and everything else, is connected to our type of thinking, and it's connected to our stress levels with cortisol and everything else. Actually, a lot of our deep-seated fears and beliefs and addictions and everything else are layered within, the conscious, the unconscious, and the subconscious mind. It's like layers of an onion. Do we have a moment quickly to go into how hypnosis works?
Of course.
Okay, what's really interesting about hypnosis is that right now, as you and I are talking, our brainwaves are oscillating at beta mode or hyper beta mode. And so when you're reading a book or you're watching TV, you're going into an alpha trance. So that's why when someone talks to you and they're like, "Hey, Chris, what are you doing, Chris?" And you're like, "Huh? What did you say?" You didn't really catch what they were saying when you were watching something, because you were in a distracted trance-like state. So when you're falling asleep at night, you're going into a theta, and your deepest, most profound level of sleep is actually your delta state. And so what people don't realize is that when you're 0 to 5 years old, sort of idea, you're in that delta state. You're in that profound, most deepest level of sleep, brainwave state. And that's why a lot of what gets programmed into you not only comes to you in utero, like Dr. Gabal Mate talks about in Vancouver, the great addictions specialist, about how addiction starts actually in utero, and a lot of beliefs your mother might have had or emotions she carried that you actually pick up from that. But you're picking up a lot of these beliefs and traits even as a young child, which is very important to look at. But also as you move up and you're getting a little older, you're going to your theta state, and then as you become a teenager, you're fluctuating with all these brainwave states, and then you kind of level out as an adult. And so when you're doing hypnosis with someone, and you're using the right inductions and you're going into these states, it's very important that you understand where certain beliefs are stored. It doesn't matter if we're doing a past life regression, looking at a traumatic memory, or you're going back into a certain age. Like, you'd actually want to gear up what age that disease or that memory or that pain was associated with and what brainwave state, and try to get as close as you can into that and kind of just fire into it that way. So the mind is absolutely fascinating. And if you doubt that, I mean, go pick up Michael Talbot's book, The Holographic Universe, and see the example that he gives where, and I'll tell you, I've seen this myself many times, that he gives an example where someone is actually hypnotized to see the person in front of them as being invisible. And the subject is able to read the inscription on a pocket watch through the other side of the invisible person, which just totally blows our mind. I've actually seen David Blaine do this on stage before. It's just total random guess. He's been able to use the power of the mind so he could touch somebody on one side of the stage, and the person on the other side of the stage is feeling what they're touching. He didn't even go near that person. He just said, you guys are connected through an invisible mirror. You're connected through a mind link. So the power of our mind is incredible. It's generating and creating everything in our world and in our bodies.
Wow. So that being said, we would have the ability to possibly heal diseases that we have.
Oh, you absolutely have the ability to heal everything in your body. It's like Jesus said in the Bible, it's by your faith you were healed. He was telling people said, did you heal me? He says, no, it was actually you that healed you. So you have the ability, if you know it's possible, if you have the belief and you know you can do it, you most certainly can.
Wow, that's fascinating. Do you have anything upcoming interesting that you'd like to talk about before you go?
Absolutely. Make sure you check out my YouTube channel, Metaphysical Source, and also on my website, metaphysicalsource.com. We have all sorts of great new things coming, but most certainly I have some tours coming up I want to tell everyone about. If you want to see the mysteries for yourself, join myself and Muhammad Ibrahim and on the Ancient Mysteries Tour of Egypt. And you can find that through Guide of Egypt on Facebook. We're going next March. Come with us. It's going to be awesome. We have exclusive permissions to get you into all kinds of places. We're going to be looking at hieroglyphics and things that are going to blow your mind, I promise you. And I'm also going with my friend Brian Forster over to, we're doing the Serpentine Mysteries Tour of Peru next year, and we're going to go to Punapunku in Bolivia and look at the elongated skulls as well in Paracas, and we're going to be exploring these mysteries even further. So don't miss out.
Awesome. Looking forward to that. And I want to thank you again for joining us. I'd love to have you back sometime.
I'd love to come back. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And you have a good night. Thanks again.
You as well. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.